My name is Mark Lane. Um, I was born in 1929 in a little village called Olenovo in the area that was then Czechoslovakia. In my grandmother's bed, because the village had no electricity or running water or any of the modern amenities, but my maternal grandparents, my mother's parents, had a farm, and it was my favorite place to go to later on, summertime, to ride on a huge, one of the huge farm horses that I used to ride him standing up when I was a kid. And but it was a wonderful life. Actually, later on, when Czechoslovakia collapsed in 1938, and our area was ceded to Hungary, a lot of the villages, you're right, they changed the name to Hungarian names. This one remained. It was only a small village, population about 300. My early memories were, actually I was supposed to be born in Paris, France. My parents lived in Paris. My father learned the fur trade and became a furrier. And so after he married my mother was 18. She was 19 when I was born. So my mother wanted to have me at my maternal grandmother, so she came to Czechoslovakia, and otherwise I would have been born in Paris. And I still have a large family in France to this day.
Okay.
My father was in the fur business, and he believed in the summer holidays, and we had a wonderful life. I went to private Hebrew school, and later on in the what they call gymnasium, which is in Lakela High School. It's called gymnasium in Europe, and was a wonderful school. In fact, all our teachers, without exception, including our sports trainer, Dr. Strasser, had a PhD. We started at age 10 English, Latin, algebra, history. And when we learned history, for instance, it wasn't like we had to know the size of the country, the population, the languages they spoke, the stuff that they grew, the name of all the rivers and all the mountains. It was a very, very good school. And when the Hungarians occupied the territory in 1938, a lot of the Jews, including my father, lost their license to run businesses. We had a fur store. In fact, we had a fur store opposite the Bata stores. Bata, the shoe store that we have right here in Toronto, was a Czech company, Bata. And so my father went into the lumber business. He bought acreages, which were auctioned off, because all the forests belonged to an Austrian baron, Graf Schönborn, obviously very rich man, but he sold acreage. My father bought so many acres of lumber, and they hired the people to cut the lumber down and so on. In fact, as kids, we used to love to see my dad get on a horse and go up to the forest to see how the work is going. I had two brothers and a sister, and unfortunately both died in Auschwitz, including my mother. We had a radio, Telefunken, happened to be a German-made radio, but we also got shortwave. And to listen to a foreign station, you could be arrested for that. So my father used to put a very heavy down comforter over our heads and his head, and listen to the BBC. And the BBC had different languages that everybody and it was understood. You know, it was aimed at the listeners of other countries. So we knew what was going on. We didn't know the scope of what was going on. Although Um, Foreign people that lived in Hungary were subject to deportation, especially Jews. My father, because he was in the fur business, he had customers that had some sway, so we managed to get Hungarian citizenship. One of my father's brothers, who had 8 children, they were taken to Poland across the border from where we lived, and they were shot to death. One cousin survived, happened to be one of the last ships that made it from Europe to the United States. In fact, my uncle, he faked his death. He lied down, he didn't move. At night he got up and he got away from the place where they were shot. But he unfortunately ended up in Auschwitz later on. And the school, of course, was also mentioned. For instance, our principal, Professor Kugel, came from Palestine. And when the war broke out, because he had a British passport, so he was able to leave. But all our other teachers, I mean, we knew everything was going on. But we didn't know the big scope. In other words, we didn't know that Hitler's policy was, by that time, as soon as the 1939, when he invaded Poland, right away came the so-called Einsatzgruppen, who started to kill all the Jews. Yes. We remember was shown on news reels in the movie houses, and there was Chamberlain waving that piece of paper with Herr Hitler, and there's going to be peace in our time. And Hitler has no further claim on any territory from Czechoslovakia.
So our Prime Minister has come back from his third and greatest journey, and he said
that the settlement of the Czechoslovakian problem, which has now been achieved, is, in my view, only the prelude to a larger settlement in which all Europe may find peace. This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine. Some of you perhaps have already heard what it contains, but I would just like to read it to you. We, the German Führer and Chancellor, and the British Prime Minister have had a further meeting today and are agreed in recognizing that the question of Anglo-German relations is of the first importance for the two countries and for Europe. We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again. We are resolved that the method of consultation shall be the method adopted to deal with any other questions that may concern our two countries, and we are determined to continue our efforts to remove possible sources of difference and thus to contribute to assure the peace of Europe.
there was no sign of British reserve as the crowds fought to get near the Premier's
Yes,
car.
we used to go to movie houses very often. Mostly comedies in Hungarian and in German. And I like opera to this day. So anything was opera, I used to go to. And what's his name? Caruso came to town in a beautiful theater. He sang so. And my dad liked Caruso very much. So we went to listen to him. We played soccer and we swam and we went to pick mushrooms and we went fishing. I went fishing in the small village with my grandfather. and up the Carpathian Mountains, the mushrooms were as big as a dinner plate. Beautiful, beautiful. And of course we had fields, so because it was in a valley, so our fields were not contiguous. We had potato field in one side and cornfields on another side, and so on. But we were busy.
Yeah.
We used there was no chemical fertilizer. We used the manure from our own animals to fertilize. In the springtime, I used to go hitch the horses, and I used to plow the manure into the soil. And we were not eating the bread of idleness.
Mm-hmm.
We worked, we played, we had a wonderful time. After the Hungarians came in, I remember one incident. We came out from the school. This was before Christmas time, and some of the non-Jewish boys came out with big sticks and shouting "dirty Jew" and so on, and chasing after us. Luckily, I wasn't hit, but that's when we felt that we were not safe. In the village of my grandparents, no. And they were there since the year 1600 and something, because we managed after the war. My dad went to the archives and so on. So we have documents stating, since when the land belonged to them and so on. So in that village, no. Because my grandmother's brother had the tavern where the population used to come to drink, and if they didn't have, they earned their living from small pieces of land that they sold, the produce from, and if they didn't have the money to pay, just wait until when the crop comes in, we'll pay. Never a problem. So in that village, no. In fact, interestingly enough, I was always referred to as, my mother's name was Sarah. I was referred to as Sarah's son, never Emil's son, because he was the outsider. But my mother was born there, lived there among them. She was always Sarah, and that was her son. In other words, if we saw boys coming with sticks, they were after us, especially during certain holidays, before Christmas or Easter, in those days it was, the Jews were at that time referred to as Christ killers. How a Jew of the Galilee, became, responsible for our misfortunes. So the Romans killed him, and we had to pay the bill for many, many years, until the last few decades when the popes absolved the Jews from. The older students who were of university age, there was numerus clausus. They only accepted so many. Not that Hungary had many universities. They only had, as far as I remember, one in Budapest and one in Debrecen. There were not too many universities in the country. It was very hard to get in. So, but life, the Jews, the men, had to go to labor battalions. But labor battalions, they were not like concentration camps. They were working, for instance, the Hungarian artillery was very modern. They were pulled by horses. You know what I mean? And especially my uncle, after all born on a farm, used to animals, so they used to take care of the animals behind the front. In fact, one of my uncles was captured by the Russians, and he spent almost the last years of the war in Siberia. My father was not, because of the interesting situation. The commanding general of our area was a general, and his wife was a customer of my father's. And every time that a call-up came for him to go into the labor camp, threw the piece of paper, a couple of silver foxes, or whatever else, went to see her. She gave it to her husband. 2 weeks later, a release came. Until 1943, when he was appointed commanding general of the Budapest area, and so there was no more pull. He had to go in for 3 months, but then he came home on leave for a week. It was not very hard labor. He didn't have it too bad because himself and a few of his buddies, they bribed the guards and so on, and they brought them food from outside. And this was near the only lake that Hungary has, Lake Balaton. This was summertime. They used to go swimming. He didn't have too tough a time. When he was away, we went for holidays in the Carpathian Mountains. It was beautiful. There was no problem until the fascists completely took over. And Germany, in fact, we had a neighbor next to us who was the importer of the fruits for the city. He was a big man. He was in the labor camps. He wasn't home, and they had one little boy. She was afraid to sleep alone, so I slept in her house right next to us. And one night, there was a big banging on the door, and I woke up. She woke up. She says, "There is a German soldier banging on the door." I opened the end of the rear of the house where the bathroom was. I opened the window and I shouted. My father woke up. I'll never forget that. He was not afraid. He pulled off a slat from the fence and came running. He wasn't afraid of the German soldier. He came with a slat. He was going to bang it. The German ran off. So, but until the Germans came in, and of course the Hungarians themselves had plenty of fascists among them. We used to sing songs praising him in school that we were taught. And we recited Hungarian poetry. I'm a Hungarian. I was born in Hungarian. Very patriotic poems that we had to learn by Sándor Petőfi, famous Hungarian poet. Hori was never tried as a war criminal after the war. He lived out his days in Portugal, was never accused of murder, although he was an admiral of a navy that didn't exist. This goes back to the Austro-Hungarian Empire when Fiume was part of Austria, and ergo he was an admiral. They used to call him Vitez, which means hero Horthy. During the First World War, he had problems. He had made pogroms on Jews and so on, but no big exterminations, because he was of the rightist rather than, in those days, of course, right after that, communist parties were formed and so on. So there was a lot of political turmoil, and especially since they lost the war, so. But he actually withstood a lot of pressure from Hitler. Hitler wanted him to start to deport the Jews, start killing the Jews much earlier. And somehow he withstood the pressure. Of course, in Hungary, some people said there was a famous Jewish family that owned a steel factory, and that he was somehow associated with him. This is why he was more lenient. But in any event, until he was in power, it was bearable. Terrible. When they saw to kill a Jew, there was no punishment. There was no punishment for killing a Jew. Anybody with a pistol that wanted to kill a Jew, killed a Jew, no punishment, no problem. No, we moved to Ghetto just after Passover in 1944. which was the end of April. And we were only in the ghetto for about 3 weeks. But the ghetto for us was a bad situation because our city, while it was Czechoslovakia, I think the Czechs knew that they will not be able to hang on to it for some reason or other.
Okay.
Mukachevo in Czech, Munkac in Hungarian, and Mukachevo in which today is Ukraine. So they did not invest too much money in infrastructure. Consequently, a lot of houses, for instance, we had an indoor bathroom, we had a tub, and we had a heater, but the heater, you had to heat the water with wood or with coal. It wasn't an electric heater. We took baths once a week. And a lot of houses, yeah, we had electricity also. A lot of houses had no electricity and no running water. And so the poorest section, it was called the Jewish Street, Yiddish house, the Jewish Street. We never knew that that area existed. Such poverty, and so that we were not given, told you go to this and this address to the ghetto. You have to find your own lodging. My father found basically it was a shack, one room. So we whitewashed it to make it very livable, but mercifully we were only there for 3 weeks. And in those days, even though we went to the ghetto, my grandmother in the village was able to bake bread, and one of my uncles in a full valise came carrying a valise full of bread. So this is what we ate, because there was nowhere to buy anything in the ghetto. Didn't supply anything whatsoever. And then we were taken to the brick factory. Because brick factory had a railway siding, and that's where the wagons were waiting for us.
Now, do you remember?
And then we were loaded on. First of all, they came, the guards and the officers shouting, whoever has anything, gold, this money, everything to hand over. And then we took some bars of soap. We didn't know what was happening. We took soap. They broke the soap bars in half to see if there's nothing hidden inside the soap. Unfortunately, the family jewelry was put. We had a container with goose schmaltz. What do you say? Fat,
Okay.
And put the jewelry in there and buried it in the garden. And when we left, I guess they were looking for fresh diggings, and they found it. Because after the war, we tried to. Everything was gone. Everything was gone. To give you an idea, when my father's license to run a Förster was taken away, he went to Budapest, and he brought home a guy. His name was Sherek. He was limping. One foot was higher than the other. One shoe was this high. Limping. But he was a furrier, and he was a non-Jew. And my father gave him 50% of the business without investing one single penny. And he was living right next door to us. Even he didn't raise a finger because he figured he ended up with everything. It wasn't in his interest to help my father in any shape or form. That's the way it was. You see, for a non-Jew, to save a Jew was also a big problem, even if he wanted to. To save a Jew, you were caught, you were subject to being executed. So you had to be very, very brave to be able to really go out on a limb to try and save a Jew. Sometimes I ask myself the question, how would I react in a situation like that? Very tough decision. And there we waited until the trains were full, the wagons, and then a trip that should have taken altogether maybe, I don't know, 8, 10 hours, took 3 days, because we were shunted always to sides, big military trains passing by, until we arrived in Auschwitz, in Birkenau. There was the infamous Dr. Mengele. There was no water. It's a good thing it was in May. It wasn't that hot, but there's tiny little openings, barbed wire in front, where the air came in. There was a couple of pails to relieve yourself. It stank too high. There was barely room to sit, never to lie down. It wasn't a very pleasant trip. It was a horrible trip. And my dad, I guess he knew more than we knew that he knew. Right away he said, the situation doesn't look good, and whoever stays alive comes back home. Those were his parting words to my mother, my 2 brothers and my sister. And my father and I, we went to one side, my mother and the kids to the other side. They went straight to the gas chamber. We went to the barracks, and everything that we had, our clothing was taken away from us. In fact, there was a camp in Birkenau called Canada, where all this was sorted and was all shipped to Germany. And my father and I, we were given, first of all, every hair was shaven off, without shaving cream or anything. All underarms or, private parts and so on. And in the head was shorn and then shaved, a 2-inch wide strip in the middle going from front to back. Just in case somebody escapes, they should immediately see that this is an escaped convict. We asked the people, they were there already, and you could see flames coming out. There, the smell was horrible. The flames were coming out of the chimneys. So we asked, my father asked one of the persons who was there for a long time, where are the families? Because they were told that they're going to work in the fields and so on. He says, going up in flames. So we knew what was going on. My father and I were together for a week, and if we would have stayed together, neither of us would have a chance to survive. So they were looking for volunteers to go to Warsaw. They were cleaning up the rubble of the ghetto when they had the uprising, and we discussed it. And my father says, well, because it's construction, hard work and so on, he'll go and I'll stay. And whatever happens, happens. I was not there too until August at 2 o'clock in the morning. Maybe the cruelty of giving us maybe hope, because figuring that now that we have registered, to give the name and so on, that maybe there's a chance. So I stayed in Birkenau, and 16 boys, all high school boys, were assigned to clean toilets. There was one barrack, which was the toilet barrack, from front to back, just cement in the middle and holes, no seats, just hole after hole after hole. And we had a wagon that had an opening on top, 16 boys pulling ropes, and we had pails with ropes attached that we used to lower to the latrine and emptied into the wagon, which we emptied twice a day, not far from the crematorium. And in a way, it was a good job, because we used to, within the Birkenau itself, there are many different camps. Camp A, so on, each camp had a name, and we were able to send messages were sent from one to the other. I had an aunt and 3 cousins in the camp called Canada, where the things were sorted. When they saw the wagon coming, if they had something to throw me. So underneath my striped clothing, I had a good pair of, I had socks, I had a sweater, and so that all helped me, and gloves, and I was lucky. I also had my ski boots with me, although it was me. My father says, "Put on your ski boots." I said, "What for?" He says, "Put them on. It make you look taller." Because in those days the skis were that used to with the key, used to screw them on. So the soles were about 1.5 inches thick. That helped me to survive later on. When they had the selection that the had to be so high, I was able to escape. And we also worked in the potato fields. And sometimes we were able to cut them and put them around we didn't have belts, but we had rope. And sometimes they also were able to throw a piece of bread and so on. And then I found a container, must have weighed at least 1/4 pound, with saccharin, and diabetics didn't give anything, so I was able to. Also, between all the fences in Birkenau were electrified. If you touched one, you were gone. In fact, a lot of people, this is how they committed suicide. Couldn't live, they went over to the fence, touched it, you were gone. Sometimes it was also our job to pick up the bodies and take him to the crematorium. So we knew what was going on. We knew about the gas chambers, and we knew about the crematoria. And there was one barrack was called the Sonderkommando. That's where the people that worked in the gas chambers, they were killed every 3 months. And it so happened that while we were there, it was the intelligentsia of our city, the doctors, the lawyers, who had to do it. Sometimes they had to throw in their own families' bodies into the ocean. We arrived on May the 5th, May the 8th, and I was there until January the 8th, 1945. It was very hard to make friends. We were a group actually of 8 boys, all Hebrew-speaking boys from different countries, from Lithuania, from Poland, from Czechoslovakia, no Hungarians. I was the only one who spoke Hungarian. Yeah, one Hungarian, Arthur Brown. I'll tell you about him later. In fact, one boy from Greece. Now, the lingua franca in Europe among the Jews was Yiddish, which was sort of taken from Hochdeutsch originally, very similar to German, with Hebrew words in them. And when the Greek transport arrived from Saloniki, so one boy came into the barracks, and he ran along. He says, "Is there anybody that speaks Hebrew in this barrack?" Because he didn't speak, in Greece they don't speak Yiddish. He spoke Greek and Hebrew. So we took him in. So we were a group of boys that tried to look out for each other, but you could not, it's very hard to explain, you had to concentrate on your own survival. And you could not make friendships like we have today. And in other words, nobody would have gone to help another person because his life was dependent on it. You just couldn't do it. You had to concentrate on your own survival. 1939, a month before war broke out, which was in September, this was August, I was holidaying at my maternal grandparents, right? And my grandmother, whom I absolutely adored, I was the first grandchild, and I was kingpin. If anybody was there for the holidays, it was me. And she loved me, and I adored her. And in fact, there is something interesting. My grandfather was in the States twice, and he didn't like it, and he came back. Imagine, he was in America. But so in 1939, a month before, my grandmother tells me there is a, what they call a Wunder Rabbiner, a wonder rabbi, a saint. He's in a village called Polina, not far from Wolanyovo, about maybe 6-7 kilometers. And I'm going to take you to the Rebbe, it's called the Rebbe, and he's going to bless you. When you come in, you're going to kiss his hand. He's going to ask you questions, you answer them. When you leave, you kiss his hand again. He's going to give you the saintly blessing. I did as she was told. We hitched up a horse. Buggy was a lovely ride, beautiful sunny day. We arrived. I went in as instructed. I kissed the rabbi's hand, asked me my name, what I'm studying, and so on. And he says, my son, I remember his words like it was today. You're going to have long life, and God is going to help you, that you're going to be successful, and you're not going to suffer. And then he blessed me with a priestly blessing, and I kissed his hand, and I came and told my grandmother what happened. So here I am in Auschwitz. You asked me psychologically. I know my father's gone to Auschwitz. Hopefully, by miracle, I hope that he is alive. So his picture was in front of my eyes. And the picture of the rabbi who told me that I did not want to make a liar out of the rabbi. The rabbi said, I'm going to long years. So, later on, people asked me, why didn't you resist? I didn't resist. Look at me. I'm alive. I resisted. If I wouldn't have resisted, I wouldn't be alive. So it's incredible how faith, if you believe in something, and I never lost hope. And transports came, and by that time we knew what was happening, and we knew when D-Day was, and we knew the Americans are coming and the British are coming, and we knew what was happening, because the transport, they brought news. So we have to outlive him. We have to, this guy, this murdering son of a bitch, one of these days he's going to croak. I don't know if you want that on, but we cried, him and me both cried, and we said we hope to see each other again. We hope we'll survive. One was, they were playing soccer among themselves, the Nazis, the SS and the They took a boy, so Appel, Antreten, took a boy, stood him against the goalpost, took a slat, hammered it in above his head. Everybody had to cross. Whoever was high enough, taller, went back to the barracks. Whoever wasn't, went to the gas chamber. This was one. And it was always in the Jewish holiday, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. The last one, a miracle, once in the history of Auschwitz, a thing like this happened. When we undressed to go into the gas chamber, it was a huge hall. We were undressed, we were naked. All of a sudden, shout, Achtung! We all stood at attention. The camp commander came, says, we're going to have races. We had to run in the whole hall. Whoever ran, he had a stopwatch. Whoever ran fast enough, according to his wishes, went back to the barracks. The rest went to the gas chamber. The incredible thing that to this day I cannot understand, that we were naked, ready to go into the gas chamber. Nobody cried, nobody wailed, because the whole time that we were there, we knew that we're going to die. It's just a question of when. So no, we were resigned. Incredible thing. Resigned to go into the gas chamber. 51 boys came back, me included. I'll tell you an interesting story regarding this, because I mentioned my buddy Arthur Brown. Arthur Brown was a boy born 1929, same as me, from Budapest. But he was in a school about 30 miles away from Budapest. The Nazis came, took the whole school, put him on a train. He wrote a note and threw it out through the little opening, and it says, whoever gave the name of his parents and the address in Budapest, so deliver this note and you will be properly paid. He still has the note. This is an aside. And the note was duly delivered. He was the only one in his family that ended up in Auschwitz. The rest of the family survived, but Wallenberg was protected by Wallenberg. But that's another story. The story that I'm going to tell you is this goes back about 10 years ago. We were in Deerfield Beach, Florida. We were invited to a friend of ours, Ellen Teichman, for supper. It was a Friday evening. And I was in just a pair of pants and short-sleeve shirt and so on. I'm sitting at one end of the table, and this gentleman who I never saw before, in a beige suit, with a vest. It was a hot evening, and with a vest and a tie, and we were introduced, and we were talking. And then he says, I see you have a number. I see the B14664. Takes off his jacket, B14644. We are 20 numbers apart. Not only that, but the same guy that tattooed me, tattooed him, because we recognize, because several tattooists were doing it. We recognize the same letters. Arthur Brown. And in fact, I just spoke to him last week. We're still in touch. And so it's quite possible that we even slept on the same bunk. But I wouldn't recognize him. Nobody, this is so many years later. I tell people, if my mother walked through the door, I wouldn't recognize her. Of course, we had no prayer books or prayer shawls or anything. But those of us who studied and who remembered, so we were praying and we were hoping, and we never gave up hope or our faith. There's a German word called Kinderstube, meaning the child's room, meaning the upbringing, meaning the background. It's how you're brought up, it's how you're educated. And so from a very early age, right when I started, say, I'm going to fight, I'm going to live, I'm going to starve, but I'm going to live. I mean, they gave us a cheese full of maggots called kvargel, a yellow cheese. I guess the army couldn't eat it already. It was full of maggots. It stank to high heaven. A lot of people, even though they were starving, they just couldn't stomach it. They threw it away. I picked up that cheese. I knew that maggots had protein. And I knew that cheese, so I pinched my nose, but I ate it and I swallowed it. It's an amazing thing that certain aromas, they stay with you for the rest of your life. Smell is one of the things you don't forget. So to this day I remember the smell, and I would still eat it if I encountered it. The Limburger is mild compared. It's called the kvargel. Anyway, so I did everything to stay alive, because I said, I am not going to give Hitler a victory. I'm going to stay a Jew, and I am not, because we had the star that we had to wear before. I was never ashamed to wear the star. And I even unfortunately, in Toronto, a couple of times, that I was insulted. The person that insulted me didn't get away free. So so we survived. The winter came, terrible. The winter of 44, 45 was a horrible winter. And the Russians, we already heard the Russian artillery from a distance away, great explosions. And then the SS came and us roused from the barracks. They were very good at that. And schnell, and on the road, it's the so-called Death March. And then we walked for 3 days, believe it or not. And we had Russian prisoners against the Geneva Convention. This was prisoner of war camps. They were with us, and they were a section of their own. All of a sudden, you know, the predecessor of the famous Volkswagen was for their army, like, you know, Jeep type, no tops, had machine guns on them, and they came. We heard shouting at the Russians. He lie down. The machine got them right on the road, and we. After 3 days, they put us on train, on wagons. We didn't know where we were going, but after a day and a half, they opened the doors, and we were in Prague, in Czechoslovakia. And the Czech Red Cross, to this day I can't understand how they were operating. Just during the war, because the war ended in May, this was in January, and the Czech Red Cross was functioning. So, cup of tea, bread, and one of the women took off her sweater, and I put it on again under my stripes. 2 sweaters this time. Those boots, I survived because of those boots. Because if you had those shoes, they gave you the pieces of wood clogs with cloth on the top, the same from the stripe. And in the snow, you know, they were this high because they picked up the snow. They couldn't get rid of it. It was unbearable. To talk about the boots, I always, if I took off my boots to sleep, I put them around my neck, the laces, because they still did. There was one poor guy from Holland, and he was hollering in Dutch. I'll never forget as long as I live. Men had me de schoenen gestolen. Somebody stole my shoes. The poor guy, somebody stole his shoes. You stole your shoes, you were finished. Never found the shoes. Anyway, I had those boots, and how? Guarded them with my life. And so the train, as I say, in Prague, and I got some more clothes, then started off again, and we arrived, we didn't know where, and they marched, and we arrived in Mauthausen, in Austria. Huge gates, big, huge gates. It was built as a fort originally. The barracks were added on later on. That's some permanent buildings. And in fact, 4 years ago, my wife and I always wanted to have the feeling of going into those gates, a free man, and coming out a free man. It was with me for all these years. So 4 years ago, Ruthie and I, we went for 3 days. We stayed in Vienna, and we took the train to Mauthausen. And we arrived at those gates, and now it's a money-making thing for the Austrians. They charge admittance. And I come to the gate with Ruthie, and I said in German, 124, 922, 124, 922. That was my number in Mauthausen. So with their January, since January, the 8th, January, February, the middle of March, again, there in Mauthausen, we worked in a quarry. 198 steps going down and 198 coming up. And about every 20 paces, there is an assessment by the truncheon who beats you over the legs, mach schnell, faster. What they did with those stones, there is a display in the camp now of the stones. What they did with them, we have no idea. But now it's all overgrown. There's moss on the, you know, and all kinds of memorials. This is now. Very, very hard work. And not only that, when we came home, the barracks had wooden floors. We come in and they give us a brick with emery things around them. We had to sand down and polish the floors. Very little food. We visited all the buildings. unbelievable. My barrack is still standing, number 11. Skin and bone, in fact. We went through, let me just tell you with the rest of it. From Mauthausen, we walked to a camp called Gunskirchen. Gunskirchen was an unfinished camp in the forest. Had no floor. It was mud. It was middle of March, and the sun was shining. It started to melt a little bit. It was mud. No facilities of any kind, and they still had a sign: "Eine Los, dein Tod." One louse and you're dead. I used to take my shirt because it was in the forest, put it on a branch, and just go down just to check there are no lice. Nobody ever checked whether we had or not. But conditions there, I mean, that was not even a concentration camp. It was called the KZ, Konzentrationslager. This was a Vernichtungslager, meaning I don't remember eating there at all. We were there until May the 5th, 19, when we were liberated. When they saw us, they never saw apparitions like that. They had tears in their eyes. And they certainly, in those days, we said, "Don't die, the Americans are here, we're free, blah, blah." They died. See, that was Gunskirchen. This is how we lived. This is how we, I should say, existed. So they had, they came with tanks, and in all different languages, you're free. A couple of weeks later, I got typhus, because we started to eat, I wasn't eating the right things. But we survived. We didn't believe it. After what we went through, we're free. We're free. Only people that lost their freedom can appreciate what freedom is. We didn't know from one second to the next whether we're going to live or die. When we saw a German with a gun, we didn't know whether he's going to take it out and kill you. I forgot to mention that in Birkenau, the fences were electrified, and there was between camps, there was a space about 10 feet wide that in the summertime grew weeds. And one of our jobs was to come and pull out the weeds, because sometimes the weeds grew high. We figured maybe somebody can sneak through in between. So they turned off the electricity while we were doing that. But sometimes they wanted to have some fun, so they didn't turn off the electricity. And some boys, they came close, they were electrocuted, they died. I mean, the things that the cruelty, it was very hard for us to understand. After all, we were getting an education in the gymnasium. I said all the subjects that we learned. And because there were not too many universities in Hungary, where were we going to go to university? Of course, what came into mind? Heidelberg, Bonn, Munich, Nuremberg, all the famous universities. How in the world could the most modern, the most advanced, the most technically proficient people in the world, I mean, the U.S. owed money to Germany at one time. How they were able to be converted into a nation of murderers? They built factories to kill people. And it wasn't only Jews that they killed. Anybody, he started off with his own Germans in the hospitals that were, mentally challenged and so on. These are not real Germans. We're not going to give them good German food. They don't earn their keep. Kill them. I think 60 million people in total were killed. But I'm talking about wars. We were a disciplined people. We're an ancient people. Since Father Abraham, 4,000 years old. We were an unusual people that after all these thousands of years, we worship the same God, We speak the same language. I mean, we pray in the same language as our forefathers did thousands of years ago. It's a very unique, we're a very unique people. And to live in fear is a horrible thing. And we took God, we sued God, took him to court. Didn't get a judgment, unfortunately. But we asked why. To this day, I cannot understand why some people hate Jews. Walking on the way from Mauthausen to Gunskirchen was a beautiful sunny day, mid-March. Stores were open, and we walked through a city called Wels, W-L-S. And there was a lady came out from a butcher shop, and she was carrying stuff that she bought in the butcher shop. And I spoke with her German. Sometimes I still do. Depends how the spirit moves me. And I said, "Madam, I am hungry. Would it be possible for you to give me something to eat?" Didn't even look in my direction. We walked in broad daylight through a city. Nobody gave us a second look. I never died in the wool Nazis, Somebody says, Germans, they were attacked. They were there hiding, waiting for him to come in. He himself was an Austrian. How anybody can have hatred like that is. I was put in a wonderful Catholic hospital. And the nurses were the sisters with those billowing headdresses. And we must have been, those huge rooms, must have been 50 on one side and 50 on the other side. And they took wonderful care. And I had typhus, and they cured me and healed me. And then I hung around in Austria, because I remember my father said, whoever survives goes back home, figuring by in the middle of August, and I had a good time in Austria. I was dealing, I was dealing in ballpoint pens, and I bought lumber, and for lumber I bought cloth for suits. I had we were a few guys, we had a wonderful time. A couple of girlfriends by that time, we had a good time. But, so time to go home. See if my father's alive. Till then I didn't know. So the Americans, again it was a beautiful sunny day in mid-August. They put us on buses. They took us down to a boat on the Danube. Put us on the boat. Wished us good luck. And I was lucky because I started English age 10, so I spoke English with a slight British accent then, but I found languages where I come from. We were Czechs, we were Hungarians, we were Ukrainians, we were Hebraists, we were Yiddish, we spoke all those languages. So I had no problem picking up languages. I also like Latin. I still remember the first sentence that I learned in Latin. The same teacher, she was from Budapest, a lady, tiny little woman about less than 5 feet tall. She taught us Latin and English. So, was the slug, as I said, and until we came to the Russian zone. Came to the Russian zone, there are Russian soldiers with this old-style Kalashnikov submachine guns. Let's go. We marched for about an hour, and we came to what used to be a concentration camp. Put us in the same barracks, gave us the same dish that everybody had to have, but one difference, when they rang the bell for some food, there was a few more potatoes and maybe a couple of pieces of meat in the soup. That was it under the Russians. And then I said, we gotta go home. Transport abasji, so why go until we transport? So finally there was enough people going to Czechoslovakia. So we figured, well, the buses are gonna come with trucks, whatever. Pishkom, you know what that means? By foot. We walked. We slept, it's a good thing it was mid-August, because we slept in the fields, and until we arrived in the Slovakian border in Bratislava. And from there, they gave us 1,500 crowns, which was enough. Yet the schools, the Jewish community, took over the school, because there was no school in August. Same thing in Budapest also. So the school, they brought in cots, and we slept there. And the 1,500 crowns was enough for a meal and a haircut. And to go to to Munkac, I had to go via Hungary, via Budapest. And so we came to Budapest, and in Budapest they took, the Jewish community again took over the St. Elizabeth School, called Szerz St. Erzsébet in Hungarian. And lo and behold, on messages on the board, on the blackboards, there is a message, my father's name. He's alive. And I hear that you're in Bucharest, and I'm going to Bucharest. So he went to Bucharest to look for me. We crossed each other a couple of times. Finally, I decided better go back to Munkac, which I did. And then my father showed up one day with my uncle, and then we didn't stay long. We left for Western Czechoslovakia, and then to Germany, to a DP camp because the communists were taking over. My father didn't want to be there. And I was a translator for the UNRWA in Germany. I was in Bamberg. There was the Ulanen Kaserne, means the was a military camp, which on Ulanen Street, so it's called Ulanen Strasse Kaserne, Bamberg, and then Bad Windsheim, which is near Neustadt, the River Aisch. It was unbelievable. You know, Germany, my father was the president of the community. In fact, my father remarried, and I have a sister. We just visited her a couple of weeks ago in White Plains, New York. My father lived in New York. And so I used to, I went with him once to the mayor's office in Bad Windsheim. And during the war, there was a sign on the bridge. There was a river. The bridge, Bad Windsheim, 100% Nationalsozialist. So my father says to the mayor, Herr Bürgermeister, wo sind die Nazis? Where are the Nazis? He says, Nazis? In Bad Windsheim? No Nazis. They were all Nazis. In Germany, I ended up, I was there, well, we crossed to in January of 46, and I was there until 1947 and a half. After that, I went to Israel. And then my father, in 48, went to New York, because he said, he's going to go to Israel, what's he going to do? Who's going to buy? First of all, it's a hot country, who's going to wear it first, number one? And who in 48 can afford? Population was only 600,000. Today it's 8 million. So my father wanted me to come to North America, and this is how I ended up in Canada. Again, the greatest country in the world. What led me to Canada was the Korean War. My dad wanted me to come to New York. I said, I come, but I owe the Americans for liberating me. And I'm going to volunteer to the American Army. And my dad says, no way. So he arranged for me to come to Canada. And it's the greatest thing he did for me. I landed in Halifax. I came here. I got a job a day after I came in a store as a salesman. And thank God I never looked back.